Hi, everybody. My name is Cindy Krum, and I'm the CEO of MobileMoxie, based in Denver, Colorado. We do mobile SEO and ASO consulting, and I am super excited to be presenting to you today a presentation called Looking at SEO with the Paradigm of the Future. Truthfully, a lot of SEOs have made their name by chasing the algorithm and really looking hard when updates go live at the data and trying to determine what happened and what went up and what went down. And for me, that's never been the way to succeed, primarily because we worked for big companies that told us outright that the earliest our recommendations would ever go live is usually in a 6-month time period, but more likely it would take 1 to 2 years for anything that we recommended to go live. And so we had to think long term. We had to not just think what's working today, but what's going to continue to work and what's really going to make the difference in the future whenever this code goes live or whenever these changes go live. And so we had to work really hard at seeing the forest for the trees, at telling the difference between what is a minor fluctuation that might bounce back on its own, and what is really critical, and what is Google going to care about as they evolve to rank and prefer in search algorithms. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories of how this has panned out for me, because not everyone agrees. I say things that are not always popular, but they do tend to pan out pretty well. So we're going to start with an old story. This is 2012 when I wrote an article called WAP Search is Dead, Long Live WAP Search. And of course, WAP is old mobile phone language. And the point of this article was to say that even though smartphones existed and most people who are surfing the web were on smartphones, Google seemed to prefer to rank stuff that worked well on feature phones too. Now, what happened when I launched this article in 2012 was that the editor of the website came back to me and said he would never let me publish anything about WAP search or even about feature phones again. He said, Cindy, nobody cares. Well, now this guy works for Google, and since about 2018, Google's been talking about the next billion users, which is to say they've been preferring content that works on all different kinds of phones, including feature phones. And in fact, they tell you outright that mobile content needs to degrade well and work not just on smartphones, but on feature phones. Maybe not WAP phones, but maybe WAP phones. Probably it wouldn't hurt, right? So it turned out my focus there was kind of right. Next story, 2014, the first year I spoke at MozCon, my presentation was about how mobile rankings were different from desktop rankings, all of the differences, why they happened, and how you can optimize for them. That same week, another speaker at the conference published something on their blog saying why you shouldn't have a mobile marketing strategy. And it basically said, Cindy, nobody cares. It said that primarily people were searching on desktop, and even if mobile exists, we should focus on desktop first. You shouldn't have a separate strategy because it's basically desktop wins the day. And this is, by the way, after Rand, the owner of Moz at the time, had published an article saying mobile SEO doesn't exist. And that was the same idea, was that mobile SEO shouldn't be different from desktop SEO. You should do them the same and maybe with a little bit more focus on desktop. Now, Google's Think with Google blog series has different publications for every different region in the world, and every single one of them has a mobile specific section of how to optimize your content for good performance, good rankings, good everything in mobile. And they count them separate, not the same. They don't say treat mobile the same as desktop. In fact, they say mobile is different. Next, I've been talking about mobile first indexing and what I call entity first indexing since 2017, 2018. So these are old slides that I'm showing you now. And I talked about how, cross-domain, cross-channel, topical organization of information was going to be the next big thing. And in this diagram, I have an entity, like the entity concept, and then we have shopping, maps, audio, video, websites with text, and apps. So that was 2018. Now, if we look at a search result, this is a search result for a book. What do we have in the first result, or the first scroll? We have knowledge graph, we have apps and apps that play audio. We have a library reserve, which reaches into the cloud to see which libraries have the book in stock near you. We have related knowledge graph, one knowledge graph linking to another. We have interesting finds, we have video, and we have shopping results at the bottom. Sometimes in this result, they're also at the top. So we're getting to this organization of the information around the entity, right? Also in 2017, I talked about PWAs and how they were important and how Google seemed to care a lot about PWAs. And at the time, someone stood up during one of my presentations, or at least, interrupted me and said, Cindy, nobody cares. PWAs weren't accepted by Apple yet. And so he was convinced that nobody would care and that PWAs weren't going to be a big deal. Well, now, and actually within a year, his platform, Yoast WordPress plugin, was transitioning to PWAs and focusing heavily on making things PWA compliant. And he's apologized. And all of these people have, we get along, and I respect them very much. The thing is, things are changing and everyone's looking at things a little bit differently. Next story is what I call dynamic links in the wild. And what I was showing in this slide was Google My Business had these G.co short links, Knowledge Graph had G.co short links, and even images that were lifted from websites, Google was giving them a new shareable short link or dynamic link that made them kind of their own thing, that separated them from needing to have a website. And I was pretty convinced that was a big deal. And I also, around about that time, started talking about fragments, or started talking about Fraggles, which was a fragment and a handle. It was Google basically lifting content from the web and linking to a piece of a page rather than the page in its entirety. That seemed like a big deal to me. Now, and as of, I think, this month, Google has officially launched this thing that they call scroll to text fragment, which is exactly what I was talking about there, either the Fraggles or the deep links into elements of things that Google has scraped that don't have to have their own web page. They just kind of live in Google land. So that seems like a big deal. So there's a lot of stories and a lot of history, but what I want you to realize and recognize is that smart people disagree, and there are a lot of opinions in SEO, and it's okay for you to have your own opinion if you see things differently, because I respect and appreciate all of the SEOs that I've mentioned and that have kind of been a sounding board for my ideas. And not every idea I've had has been correct, although I'd say most probably have. But there are a lot of great SEOs. They don't always agree. So don't be afraid to have your own opinions. And don't get so lost in the details of what you're doing right now and what you're trying to optimize for in the near term that you lose the larger picture, because this is what gets you in the situation that you're in. If you're only optimizing for today and not thinking about the future, then you're always going to be playing a game of catch up. So I've given you the history. I know what you want to know is what's next. What's the big change that I can predict now? So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through the thought process and the way I approach these kind of questions about SEO future. So we're going to go back to this screen. Now this is a mobile scroll that has, it goes a little bit longer than this even, but this is one search result for a book, and it had a lot of different stuff in it. What I want to show you here is what happens when we cover up the Google stuff that doesn't have a website. So all of the stuff that's covered in red is Google stuff that is not a web ranking. It's not from a website, or it might be lifted from a website, but it does not link to a website. So Google, I would say, looking at this, is taking up at least a third of the clickable area in the search result. But on the first screen, it's taking up all of it, because actually this piece here down at the bottom is this piece. It's the related knowledge graph. So this whole first screen is red. So that's a lot. Google is taking a lot of space in these search results. The trick is you might be able to get some of this data out of tools like SEMrush or Ahrefs or something like that. But I feel like they're not giving it the, I don't know, respect that it deserves. This is a lot of space. And if you're an SEO that's only looking at Google Search Console, these are the numbers that you would get. So ranking position 1 is middle of the second scroll, and ranking position 2 is very bottom of the second scroll. And then things get a little bit more dense. We have 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then shopping ads at the end. But remember, sometimes these shopping ads show up in the beginning. In this query, this exact query, they can also be at the beginning, pushing everything further down. Now, if this block was over here, and remember, this is kind of covered up too because it's this, then this first result would be right about here. It would be almost 2 full scrolls in of Google content before you get to anything that's actually an organic ranking. And that's important. Google is not only taking up a lot of space in the search result, but if you're only using their tools like Search Console to tell you where you rank and what your average ranking is, they're kind of lying to you. They're saying, you're in position 1, don't sweat it, you're doing great, but you're not. If they're taking all of this space, they're pushing position 1 further and further down the result and making it less likely to get any clicks at all. Because it's not just that they're taking more space. Google is making their results and their stuff more interesting. This is what that scroll looks like in real life. We've got the author. We had the paid at the top in that one. We've got some top results. We've got people also searched for. Here are the videos that mostly go to YouTube. There's Wikipedia. Wikipedia made the cut. But when you get to these blue links that are just blue links and text, you kind of feel like you've gone too far, right? When you're scrolling and you're like, oh, it doesn't have a picture, people will scroll back. And especially people who don't have a trained eye, like an SEO, they're not looking for websites. They don't care if they get a website or they get something else. They just care that their answer is found. And if Google makes their stuff more appealing than a blue link, then it's always going to get more attention. So the point of this all to say is that maintaining position 1 is not the same as maintaining visibility. You can see in this Search Console graph, we've really increased that purple line. Average position was kind of floating, but then it shot way up and stayed up high. But what happened when they went up high? Clicks went way down. Well, how does that happen? Maybe this search result got reclassified with different intent, and so Google started crowding stuff in there, like that book result that we saw a minute ago. And this isn't just happening to regular websites. It's happening to our nemesis, Wikipedia, too. This article, notice the date, was just launched yesterday, day before, and it's called How Wikipedia Lost 3 Billion Organic Search Visits to Google in 2019. And if you read, it talks about how Wikipedia used to have a lot of clicks in 2015, but in the past 5 years, those have gone way, way down. And the main contributing factor is what we're calling zero-click search results, which emphasize Google content much more than web content. Even though the web content is ranked, potentially even in position 1, that position 1 is lower and lower in the page. And in this case with Wikipedia, people used to click through to get to Wikipedia pages, but now so much of Wikipedia is scraped into the knowledge graph that there's no reason to click. So it's kind of like good news, bad news. Your content's there, but you're not getting the traffic. And so as SEOs, we need to decide how we feel about just our content getting viewed without us getting web results, and is that okay? Is it a branding effort or is it something else? Because this seems like it's the future. It seems like where things are going. And of course, I'm not the only one to say this. Rand has been talking about this for at least 2 years with this jump shot data that he's been publishing. And he hasn't published a new one of these in a little while, but these were great reports that showed, separated out desktop and mobile. And this one showed that no-click searches are especially high on mobile. Well, why would that be? Because there's no right rail. Because everything like knowledge graph and maps and paid and whatever was happening on that right rail in desktop now gets stacked on mobile, and everything pushes down lower. All the organic stuff gets pushed lower. Other people have been saying this too. Dr. Pete, of course, did a tracking study that said, how low can position 1 go? Mike King did a great write-up about how rank tracking might be misleading us. And that's my biggest concern, is that as SEOs, we're paying a lot of attention to numbers in analytics platforms and not really paying attention to other things that are happening that are harder to quantify or that are intentionally omitted from our analytics. So how can we get a better perspective? What can we do to think about the future? How can we save ourselves effort and make our SEO strategies more sustainable? Well, first, I want you to take a deep breath with me. It's going to be tough news here. So deep restorative breath in and out. Okay. I want you guys to start SEOing like an amateur, at least a little bit. I think there's a lot of value to be had in looking at real search results instead of just keeping your head in your analytics and staring at the numbers. And that's why I showed you, and will continue to show you, some real search results. And I showed you the thing with all the red, so you know where your clicks are going. The other thing I want to do in this same vein is to encourage you to read this book if you haven't already, Range by David Epstein. The central thesis of this book is to say that experts sometimes miss the mark because they're so stuck in their data and their tools in ways that generalists aren't. And in some cases, generalists are taking in more diverse data sets. And so these diverse data sets can sometimes be more nuanced and get people to the right answer and kind of save some heartache. So the idea is, yes, experts are good, but that doesn't mean that ruling out the generalists is a good idea. And he gives a lot of stories to back this up, a lot of great narratives. And I'm going to show you one that's a bit sad. I'll warn you, I'm sorry. But I think it's right on the mark for us. And it's about people who fight forest fires. These are clearly experts, well-trained, great reflexes. They know everything they can know about being safe in a fire and putting out a fire. The problem is, when they're in a situation like this, what they see is the problem that's right in front of them, and they can ignore information that's coming in, maybe through a walkie-talkie or something, about the larger picture. Or they just don't get the sense of the larger picture because they're so enmeshed in what's going on immediately in front of them. And David Epstein tells this story about people, forest fighters who, since they can't see the larger picture, even when the fire ranger radios to them and says, this fire is about to flash over, it's about to get way more dangerous, or you're about to get blocked in, you need to get out right now, the experts have such a hard time dropping their tools and running because it's not what they're trained to do. What they're trained to do is fight. And so there have been all these, apparently, studies where firefighters ignored the guidance from someone who was more of a generalist, who wasn't in the fire fighting it right then. They ignored it because they thought they knew better, but then they died because they didn't just run. They didn't drop their tools and get out. They continued to fight, or they at least kept their tools on them because they wanted to be able to continue to fight later. And that was horrible for many of these great people. And so what I want you to do is to be able to see things from more of a distance and not just be enmeshed with your data and be so enmeshed in the current situation that you're in that you can't see the larger scenario that's happening. So hopefully that wasn't too depressing. Let's go back to the book. So there are many more uplifting stories in the book, but that one just really struck home to me because I think that part of the problem that we're dealing with is our tools and our enmeshment with the tools and the information that we have rather than the information that is more broad. So let's look at this book range. When we do a search for range, we get a knowledge graph like this. Notice that share link up in the upper right-hand corner, the triangle. That's where you get the short link to this knowledge graph. We also get information lifted about the book from Wikipedia, publication date, all of this stuff, pictures of the cover. We get ads, and we can have it shipped. We have all of this stuff that's going on, and this is what the desktop version of this search result looks like. What do you notice again here? No organic results above the fold, 0. But it's even worse on mobile, what we talked about. All this stuff gets stacked, and it pushes organic down and down and down. We haven't seen an organic listing yet. Oh, there's the first one for Amazon. Awesome. Okay. So what I want you to think about when you're thinking about the future is all of the things that show up in your tools, or that don't show up in your tools, and especially if you're relying heavily on GMB, they seem to be intentionally omitted. These are things like site links, image thumbnails, map thumbnails, image carousels, answer vertical expanders, app packs, map packs, image packs, video packs, knowledge graph, featured snippets. People also search for related searches, interesting finds, podcast results, PPC results, popular products or product knowledge graph, and then jump links and Fraggles. All of these things are things that take attention away from a blue link and make it harder to know where someone is going to click, because we've just added so many potential clicks to any given search result. So let's talk about the thing that's at the top that SEOs never want to talk about, and that's ads. So ads actually are a big deal. And in the early days of ads, actually, SEOs would do PPC as well. It wasn't two separate things. Many SEOs did both. But what we know about ads is that the click-through rate on ads has been increasing for years. And it, again, is especially increasing on mobile. People tend to click on ads more when they're on a mobile phone. They either just don't care or they don't know. And even though the click-through rate is only 8.7%, let's say, in mobile, that's 8.7% that's not going to you. And even if you're in position 1, and that makes it a bit more stark. But also know that the kinds of ads that people are buying are changing. And especially the Google Shopping ads, 65% of all Google ads or 65% of all Google ad clicks are for Google Shopping, and 89% of non-branded Google search ad clicks for retailers go to Google Shopping. And Google Shopping, it gives us these things on the left called PLAs, product listing ads, which are very graphical, take up a lot of space, and people are often eager to click them. And the other thing to know about this is if you do any research, what you see is that the average product listing ad has a lower click-through than a regular search ad. But remember, there are more product listing ads in one search result, and it's a carousel. So those clicks, the potential clicks, are getting divided among more ads. The propensity of people to click on a product listing ad still seems quite high because they're so graphical and engaging. But the thing to know here is that Google has launched what they call non-paid shopping ads or free PLAs. We call them product knowledge graph. So this is things that look like product ads or shopping ads, but they're organic. They're free. They're not a pay-per-click. There's no money changing hands. And this seems like a big deal. We call them product knowledge graph, and they seem to be organized around an entity. So this was a search for binoculars, and that's a featured snippet for a product, actually, which is another interesting thing. But if we scroll down lower, we're going to get to a product knowledge graph, or popular products in this case, which is a cluster. Oh, there's the product knowledge graph. When you click through in the popular products, you get through to product knowledge graph. And this is like a knowledge graph that's specifically about a product, and it shows you the reviews of a product and where you can buy it. And this is very much like a sponsored ad, but it turns out it's organic, and these things tend to rank pretty well because it's formatted in a way that Google knows. It's part of Google's knowledge graph. And This is John Henshaw, and he's been posting a lot about this, that Google announced the former head of ads is changing roles to head search while still overseeing ads. I think that we were already seeing an indication that there was going to be some kind of blurring of the lines between paid and organic. And I think that this change of roles takes that a bit further. And remember, there's really only one way to get into organic, maybe two, organic crawling in the API. But there's a lot of ways that Google is making it easy to get into the sponsored parts of their content. They're really trying to be creative here and get people into that funnel, because remember, that's what funds everything. So think about these product knowledge graphs. And I think that we need to be optimizing these. I don't feel like I hear enough SEOs talking about product knowledge graph or free PLAs, whatever you want to call them. But just know that the PPCs are already optimizing these, but that doesn't mean that they should be. I think this is much more of an SEO task because it's free, and it has to do with doing a good job optimizing titles, descriptions, and schema. It's very much like optimizing a website. Rather than doing PPC, where you're mostly adjusting bids and copy for the compellingness of it. This is a little bit of both, but I want SEOs to not be afraid when it's a little bit of both, because it seems like that's the direction things are going. So when I say think like an SEO amateur, I want you to be open to being in the search result, whatever that is from, not just saying, well, that's not SEO and I don't do it, because this is something new. And it may or may not be classified as SEO, but it sure is getting attention in the search result and taking up space in the search result. So to get a product knowledge graph, all you have to do is set up a Merchant Center account. Ideally, you're the first one there and you get there before your competitors, so you're the only store listed. But then include optimized product titles and descriptions, good schema, and set up tracking. You can get it from Merchant Center. You can also use the MobileMoxie tools to see how your product knowledge graph looks and where it ranks and what keywords it ranks for. And, you know, magically, when Google has something like product knowledge graph, it just seems to float to the top of the search results, especially if it gets good engagement. So even remember that you won't be getting this traffic immediately to your website all the time. There are ways to get it, but it has to go through a couple extra steps in Google before it gets to your site to make a purchase, but it should still be trackable towards the bottom line. You'll know when the people actually complete their purchases. So next, since we're already kind of there, let's talk about Knowledge Graph. Knowledge Graph takes up so much space in the search results, and it's interesting because it's growing. Google keeps adding stuff to the Knowledge Graph. So the phone on the left was a search for poison oak, and we get lots of different kinds of results there, but when we get to the bottom of the page, it knows the different kinds of things that are related to our original knowledge graph, and it gives us those things as related searches, and it gives us the knowledge graph or the featured snippet down at the bottom of the search result. So on the right, in this one, you can see poison oak. We have related plants, and we can click through on any of these and get to a different plant knowledge graph. So Google is using these links to specific knowledge graph to link to other knowledge graph, completely circumventing websites. That's a concern, especially because in both of these cases, it appears that the information in the knowledge graph came from Wikipedia. And in many cases, it does come from Wikipedia. So Google is being a little bit relentless here in lifting information and linking to it in the knowledge graph. So let's do a quiz. Where do we think that this URL goes? It's a g.co URL. It's encoded over here. It's just nonsense characters. What is it for? It's for the book. We've already seen this one. You get it when you click the triple dot menu next to at the top of the knowledge graph, and it's this share link. So this is a share link for a specific search result, and that only is available if there's knowledge graph. And within it, we get all of these different things that We've talked about in terms of where Google wants to go, like this borrow from the library. You put in your zip code and Google checks a cloud database for if the book is available. So Google is pulling feeds and cloud information into their search results without going through a web page. They're bypassing any kind of web page that might have the library inventory and just putting it straight in the search result. Users like that, SEOs don't. But remember, this is these short links that we talked about already. And Google could start adding this for more and more things. And especially think about images. If the image is lifted from your website, it's your image, but Google wants to share a link to it that's just a Google short link that's not to your original image, they've just rehosted it. Maybe it's problematic. Maybe it's a little shady, like theft, right? It's concerning, but it's the direction that Google's going. So you might think, yeah, Cindy, you have talked about entity first indexing, and knowledge graph is important and it is taking space, but who really cares, right? Google does a good job with knowledge graph. And I think it's potentially more concerning than you might imagine, because in the knowledge graph, Google is kind of picking a canonical answer. It's saying this is the answer to that query and there are no other answers, at least in many cases. Sometimes they give disambiguation, but often they don't. And so what shows up in the knowledge graph could be seen as especially important, especially since now Google is linking from one knowledge graph to another knowledge graph. So if you think that knowledge graph isn't that important, maybe we should ask someone like John Mueller if he thinks knowledge graph is important. Or what about Judith Lewis, Mike King, Sam Noble, even Danny Sullivan, right? Google is picking things that are not them. And if they're trying to get attention on something that they can't control, like their name, then that might be a problem for them. This also speaks to the importance of having an original name from an SEO perspective, FYI. It's something to think about. So at MobileMoxie, we do think about how do you get a knowledge graph and what do you have to do to help encourage a brand to get into the knowledge graph. And I think this is part of SEO too, even though it's not driving clicks to a website. So the top thing we have here is have a unique name and also be awesome. You can't, it's often not one or the other, because all those people that I just listed are awesome, but they still don't have their knowledge graph. So the next thing is be multifaceted. And that's a bit harder because it means you have to have websites, videos, podcasts, images, lots of things with your name on it so that Google, and it could be your brand name, so that Google can get a comprehensive idea of who you are, who your brand is, what you're about, what you do. And that might be the best way to get at least disambiguation, where Google says, oh, there are a couple different things that this might mean. I used to do an example where Google had an entry in the knowledge graph for bread, the food, and bread, the band, right? Because there's apparently a band named Bread. And so when Google at least acknowledges that you could be asking about other things, then that's a step in the right direction. Now, I think there are other things that you can do to short circuit this process, especially now with product knowledge graph. You could find something to use Merchant Center for, even if products aren't your jam. Maybe you create a product and get into Merchant Center so that you become a known entity and part of the knowledge graph that way, and then try and stem off that. The other way you can do it is getting into Google Play. Google Play has this massive hierarchy organization of books and music and TV and videos and movies and all of that stuff. And everything is classified in a very organized way. And I think that it would make a lot of sense. Well, I mean, we know they're incorporating Google Play information into Knowledge Graph. So potentially getting into Google Play is a way to add a node into the Knowledge Graph if you're a new band, or if you're a new publisher, author, whatever, that might be a good shortcut to get into the knowledge graph. And then, of course, using schema to associate yourself or your brand with something that's already in the knowledge graph, and then getting featured snippets does seem to help Google recognize things that should be in the knowledge graph sooner or faster. Okay, something else that you might have missed, and we've seen a couple of examples of this, but extra site links and Fraggles. So I've already mentioned Fraggles, but let's look at this. So on the left, we have a featured snippet. On the right, we had a similar search result with a featured snippet, but when we scroll down, we get these answers from Q&A schema. And then we get these other kinds of answers, probably also from Q&A schema. And then we get a top answer, probably also from Q&A schema. That stuff's interesting because what happens there is often you're clicking through on the answer and getting not to the top of the page, but to the middle of the page, wherever that answer happened. And that's what we call a Fraggle, because it's a fragment of text that Google is lifting into their search result. And that fragment of text has a handle. Google seems to have indexed it to the page, but separately. It gets to rank on its own, not just as a page, but as part of the page, a deeper, more nuanced kind of indexing. And that is my vision of what mobile first indexing really means. At least that's what I've been talking about with entity first indexing, that it's not just indexing pages. Sometimes the level, the increment of indexing can be more specific than that. And that especially makes sense if you think about it in context with JavaScript and potentially something like a single page app, which is a website that's all JavaScript all the time. How would Google be, number one, advocating anything like a single page app or even a native app if they weren't able to get to the deep content in the app, even though, you know, without relying heavily on single URLs that are crawled and indexed by the bot? I think that they needed a sub-level of indexing that was more nuanced than just the page. So Fraggles are fragment plus handle. And I think hopefully this is caught on, right? People are now understanding that this is something that you can optimize for. And they do help drive traffic, and they do help drive people to exactly what they're looking for, the answer that they want. And even though some of it's lifted into Google, Google is helping people have a good user experience on your page because they get them right to what they were reading already in the search result, which is probably helpful. Other than just seeing them in the wild, is Google started testing this one thing with AMP highlighting for featured snippets. Now, this has resurfaced recently and become controversial again because it's not just happening on AMP anymore, it's happening on regular pages too. But what was happening was when you saw a featured snippet that was from an AMP page, when you clicked through on that featured snippet, Google was scrolling and highlighting to exactly where that featured snippet came from. And what was interesting here is that you can see based on the highlighting, Google was interested not just in the chunk of text, but in the text that answered the question. They've skipped some of the text and kind of combined it with the triple dots, with the ellipsis, to say this seems to answer the question and this seems to answer the question. This part's fluff, we're going to leave it out. That speaks to a very sophisticated kind of language processing when it comes to Q&A, right? When it comes to really understanding the point of a question and what someone's trying to get out of the answer. And of course, you know, this has been announced, and some people are really upset about it. But so Fraggles, if you're still trying to kind of wrap your brain around Fraggles, Fraggles are essentially links to a featured snippet. This is what I've decided. And it seems like actually, if we think about Fraggles, we might be able to reverse and say, okay, featured snippets existed before Fraggles, but maybe Google was actually getting good at finding and lifting the content. And the only thing that's changed with Fraggles is now they're linking to it directly. And so if we think about Fraggles and featured snippets kind of as cousins, right? They're related, they're similar. They use the same technology to crawl and find the answers and what's really important. Then that might speak to something important about how Google's working. Let's look at this result. The query is, what's in a treehouse kit? And what I want to show you here is that Fraggles can be hard to spot because they sometimes look like site links. So the phone on the right, it had a site with site links at the top. And when we scroll down to the bottom, we don't see anything really interesting, no Fraggles, right? Now we have the exact same search in the phone on the left, it's just different phone, but notice that the greenandvibrant.com, which is in the right side too, in that case it has Fraggles. So know that they're not always showing up even with the exact same search. But what you see again here is that it's scrolling to a piece of a page, not a whole new page, even though multiple things were listed. Those were multiple things from one page. Now in the example on the right, we have site links because they're linking to separate pages. Remember, they were formatted the same with just blue text links. So in some cases, it's important for you to actually click through to know, is this a Fraggle linking to a piece of a page, or is it a site link linking to a whole new page? And this is especially important if it's a site that you don't know or one of your competitors' site. Just assuming what you're looking at is a site link instead of a Fraggle, or vice versa, it might not serve you well if you're trying to kind of backwards engineer what's going on and why something is ranking and why it looks the way it does in a search result. So let's think about this then. If Fraggles are just featured snippets with links, what if everything is kind of one or the other? Or what if everything is either a blue link, a featured snippet, or a knowledge graph? Or at least something like it. So on the right, I've searched for what is range. We start with a featured snippet, and then there's people also ask. Now remember, when you click through on people also ask, what's showing up? A featured snippet. Then we can go lower, get the videos. We get to related searches. Now, what are these related searches? Well, they're actually entries in the knowledge graph. And these expanders at the bottom are featured snippets. So when we click on the expanders, we get a featured snippet. When we click on the carousel thing on what is range, we're getting to another knowledge graph. Knowledge graph with disambiguation at the top and videos as well. But this seems like knowledge graph, or maybe it's a featured snippet. Sometimes it's hard to tell because they're starting to kind of mix in the way that they're formatting. So what if there's actually just a progression between blue links that Google really doesn't understand to featured snippets where they do kind of understand it and they can kind of evaluate it related to other featured snippets, and then knowledge graph where they feel like they have a really good understanding of this information and where they can actually link this information to related information. They've actually built a graph. And so that's how I think about SEO and the future of SEO, is we have to know, are we optimizing off-site content like knowledge graph, videos, stuff like that? Or are we optimizing blue links to get picked up as featured snippets and eventually get integrated somehow into a knowledge graph, or at least integrated as featured snippets into relationships like people also ask and related searches and stuff like that? So that's how I think about all of these things. So I think if we want to approach this strategically, how do you get site links? How do you get Fraggles? How do you get the beginning of a featured snippet? And in this case, a lot of it has to do with writing content and making sure that you optimize the H1s to match kind of the question, and then optimizing the H2s and H3s that are visible on the page with the relevant keywords that are either question or answer formatted. And using Q&A schema also helps a lot here too. And then, of course, tracking how this actually works, because remember, no one's reporting on Fraggles. Some sites are reporting on site links, but it can be hard because, as we saw in that one search result, they don't show in every query. Even if it's the same website, for the same query, all the things are the same. Sometimes we got those site links or the Fraggles, and sometimes we didn't. So it makes sense, again, to SEO like an amateur and actually test. Last thing I'll talk to you about is video Fraggles. So what we've seen now is that Google is pushing hard on video. If you want to skip the line and rank well on a topic, the best chance is actually video. I think that videos cut in line and get to the top really, really quickly. And now Google is even parsing the videos to find what it thinks answers the question the best. And so when you search for a question, it's going to say, here's a video that answers it. Here's the part of the video where the answer is found. What that tells us is that, number one, they're transcribing the videos automatically. And number two, they're using the transcriptions as keywords, like optimized text that you would put on your website, but they're just associating it with the video enough that they could find the Fraggle and link someone directly to it with these suggested clips. If you want to get those, I think it's a great strategy. All you do is you have to put your video in YouTube, and then you can add YouTube bookmarks at different timestamps so that you can help them when they're parsing. That's not required, but it's helpful. Same with the Fraggles. The jump links aren't required, but they are helpful for Google to find this stuff faster. And then, of course, track your SERP rendering to verify success, because no one's reporting on whether or not you're getting suggested clips. None of the SEO tools do this. So this is where it makes sense to SEO like an amateur and actually test real results, which of course is why we built our tools to allow you to test the real results. And in fact, we've done an update that lets you see live results from anywhere in the world, like we're showing here, but also capture the history of the results. So you can scroll through and see what visually changed here. And this is a Google My Business result, but you could do it for any kind of search result from anywhere on a bunch of different phones. And you can scroll back through history. And in this case, we're looking, when did this restaurant close? Here it did, right? It's on the 5th is when this restaurant listed as temporarily closed. So knowing stuff like that, if you had a featured snippet, if you had a knowledge graph, knowing when did we get added to this knowledge graph, when did our knowledge graph change, when did our GMB change, stuff like that, and having a visual representation and not just a numeric representation, to me is really helpful in understanding what's working, what's not, and of course where SEO is going, because you don't want to get caught in the fire. You want to put it out by seeing the bigger picture. You don't always want to be playing catch up. You don't always want to be confused and not really understanding where SEO is going. You need to look at the bigger picture, which in this case means looking at real search results to find out where the clicks are going, to take away the risk that your SEO strategy isn't going to work because it's too narrowly focused and too expert, right? We know that you're great SEO. We know that you're all experts, but sometimes being an expert can hurt you. And so what I want you to do is remember to take a step back and look at the larger picture to avoid the risks and the pitfalls. And then you'll be nurturing something that really has a chance to grow and flourish. And that's kind of my take on SEO and how we do it and how we look at the future of it. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. I also want to offer you a promo code so you can try those tools with all the mobile phones so you can see the search results. Of course, the promo code today is wine time because it's now wine time, all caps, and that's going to get you 30 days free in the MobileMoxie tools so you can look at real search results, compare them over time, and we hope you enjoy them and have a good time. And that's it for me. Thank you. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. To be notified about future videos, click the logo. And to try the MobileMoxie Mobile SEO Toolset, use the promo code YouTube to get 30 days free. They're mobile-first SEO tools for a mobile-first world.